So when we talk about big tech, it's one of these things that almost sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory at first to the people who aren't in the know. It almost sounds like we're talking about the Illuminati or some kind of secret society that controls everything in the world. And one of the things that I hear big tech skeptics often say, meaning people that think big tech doesn't actually have a great deal of control over the internet, is the fact that big tech is made up of so many different companies. They're not all under one umbrella. It's not like we live in the Mr. Robot universe where it's just Evil Corp. We have Amazon, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Apple, just to name a few. But what you need to understand is, even though these companies do have different CEOs and different tax IDs, they are constantly colluding with one another. They are constantly making backroom deals about how these few companies that you can barely count on your fingers and toes are going to divvy up control over the internet, because they realize that they basically have it. And as long as they can keep up this facade, this imaginary idea of competition, then they can keep on making billions and billions of dollars. So let's take a look at some examples of this collusion. This is a report about the ongoing antitrust lawsuit against Google. And one example of an antitrust action on Google's part is this thing that they call JEDI, which is pretty much just the code name for their plan to take over internet advertising, which they've pretty much already done. Like, this isn't something that they're planning to do in the future. This is pretty much ancient history at this point. So the way that it all works is the ads that you see on various websites, these are paid for by different companies that are trying to get you to buy whatever product or service they're advertising. And the person that is running that website, whether it's like a blog or a news site or something like that, they're getting paid by the advertisers. Usually that's how they maintain running the site, because it does cost money to run a website. Or sometimes they're able to actually make a whole lot of money from it and do their full-time job if people really like the content that's there. Now, these days, you usually don't go out to just one company at a time to get them to show ads on your site and then negotiate a price to do the advertising and everything with them directly. Instead, you go through an ad exchange, which acts as a middleman for many different companies that want to run ads for your site, and they, figure out what prices they're going to do, and obviously they skim a little bit off the top. Now, Google is one of these companies that many different companies will go to wanting to sell their products and service, and so they'll pay them to show their ads. Now, if you run a website that's showing ads, you probably don't really care too much what ad server or what ad exchange you're using to show those ads on your website. You just want to get paid as much as possible, meaning that obviously you want to serve ads that your audience is actually interested in. So say if you run a website about, plumbing, you probably have a bunch of plumbers or like DIY people visiting your website, maybe blue collar dudes. So you don't want to run ads for maybe like tiny anime cute backpacks. So you want to show as many ads as possible that are relevant, and you want the ad server to offer a good pay-per-click rate for the ads, meaning however many people, like, you actually get paid a good amount for each person that clicks on that ad. Now, it used to be that people would just go to the biggest ad exchanges like Google and Facebook to run all of their ads, and I guess that's because they assumed that they would get paid the most there. But of course, that isn't always the case. So eventually, this thing called header bidding was created, which is this process by which an auction is done in the background of the website you visit between advertisers who are basically bidding to show ads for that browser session, and whoever bids the most gets their ad shown. So you, as the content creator or content publisher, you really get to maximize your profits in this way, because you're letting multiple ad exchanges fight out, bid out who is going to pay the most. Now, obviously, Google didn't like this, because it turned out that other exchanges were actually willing to pay a lot more money, and content creators followed with the money. So Google started losing market share there. and they decided to first run a smear campaign against the header bidding technology itself, claiming that it will slow down your websites, it's difficult to implement, and that it could open up your website to getting hacked. Of course, that isn't true if you set it up correctly. And once people started becoming unsure about header bidding, Google then introduced this thing called open bidding, which they claimed was pretty much an improved version of header bidding that ran on Google's servers instead of your own. So that should have been the first red flag there. But they said that, oh no, you want to do this so that you don't have to worry about it being set up wrong or getting hacked or anything like that. But what would you know? Open bidding isn't actually fair. Google will still rank themselves as the best ad exchange. Not all the time, because that would be pretty obvious, but a lot of the time, even when other exchanges were outbidding them. Now, initially, Facebook was actually in support of header bidding back in March of 2017, but then Google came to them and offered advantages in their own ad marketplace, which was generating about 43 billion ad auctions for publishers, mobile app advertising each month in the United States. So pretty big market that Google has pretty much a monopoly over here. And as part of the agreement, these two companies also decided to work together to identify Apple users, since Apple was trying to provide some increased privacy to their users, at least when it comes to being tracked by companies that aren't Apple. And this agreement was called Jedi Blue, and it should have set off the alarms to anyone in the government about antitrust action, but it didn't. And that's just one example of antitrust action. There are more listed here in this series of tweets, like Google's plan for Project Nero, which is a plan to turn the web into a walled garden that they called not owned, but operated. Or there's Google willing to do almost anything to prevent people from circumventing their ad exchanges. And there's also the thing about Manifest v3 in Chrome, where they're trying to basically kill off ad blockers to people that are using Chrome. Now, obviously, this isn't a problem if you're using Firefox, but Chrome still dominates the browser market share. So they're definitely going to be able to start showing more ads to people and get paid. Well, they're obviously not going to pay content creators more. They're just going to keep more of that revenue for themselves. Now, I know that this might just look like it's coming from someone on Twitter, but if you're skeptical about this, or if you want to learn more about this, definitely take some time to look through this document, the 173-page antitrust litigation filing. I'll leave a link to it, this PDF, in the description of this video. Now, how do we solve this problem? Because I usually don't like to just black pill you guys and then leave you with this stuff. I like to try to think of a solution. Now, the thing is, government regulation is probably not what you want. You really don't want the government to come in and try to fix this problem, because here's what they typically do. If Google is in violation of antitrust law, the government can't just say Google is now illegal. They have to legally define how Google is being a monopoly and breaking these antitrust laws, and then make those actions illegal. Now, personally, I don't really have much hope in the government properly outlawing Google's shenanigans, okay? Because the people who make the laws in this country seem to have a staggering lack of knowledge around computers and the internet. Plus, with Google, we're dealing with a really, really big company here. So it's something that you really have to get right. The other problem with added regulations is that oftentimes big companies actually like more regulation. Okay, this is something that some people don't seem to get, but if it's a regulation that doesn't just impact them, but the competition as well, then these giant corporations, they can usually suffer through that regulation until maybe a new president is elected, or somebody's term is over, and then they can try to get those laws overturned because they've got enough like cash in the bank, enough reserves and assets to get through it. Like, for example, when a company violates a regulation, usually what happens is that company has to pay fines. And it's just like when you get a speeding ticket, except that these fines are usually millions of dollars. It depends on who's fining them and what they did wrong, obviously. And because we're all supposed to be equal under the law, these fines are going to be the same for both Apple and Joe's Computers. But Apple is a $1 trillion company, so even a $100 million fine is nothing to them. It'd be like fining a millionaire $100. For Apple, it's just the cost of doing business, but for Joe's Computers, that fine means filing bankruptcy, and now Apple has one less competitor. But people recognizing these scummy actions by Google and Facebook and choosing not to use them, especially not in the context of directly giving them money to advertise something for you, might help a bit, because you're getting screwed on the price either way. Google might be the biggest ad company, but clearly they aren't paying the best amount of money in many situations. If you're using these companies' services on a daily basis, the least you can do is educate yourself and be aware of the shenanigans that they're getting into so that you can make an informed decision as a consumer of this product or service, whether or not you want to continue using them.